This is East Asia Tonight.
Good evening, I'm Jill Newbronner, and here are the top stories from East Asia. China says it does not agree with attacks on Gulf states as Iran ramps up strikes on targets across the region, including oil infrastructure. Crude climbs again after a brief dip, with markets unconvinced that a proposed historic IEA stockpile release will tame prices amid Middle East tensions. China's top political advisory body calls for unity as the country prepares to roll out a new 5-year plan for the next phase of economic transformation. And Prime Minister Sanai Takaichi vows to set up a new agency for disaster response as Japan marks 15 years since the disaster that triggered the Fukushima nuclear crisis. Also tonight, a major relief effort in Hong Kong. The city's Red Cross raises nearly $68 million to support survivors of the deadly Typho fire, with a 5-year plan to help families recover and rebuild. China has issued a rare criticism of its ally Iran, saying it does not agree with the attacks on Gulf states. Beijing putting out the statement as more vessels get caught in the crossfire in the Strait of Hormuz. Reports indicate the Thai Navy providing assistance to a cargo ship that came under attack, forcing its crew of more than 20 to evacuate. A Japanese vessel has also reportedly been damaged. In Dubai, drones fell near the airport, injuring 4. Since the US and Israel attacked Iran more than a week ago, Tehran has hit back with missiles and drones at targets across the region, including oil infrastructures. Beijing says it is firmly against going after non-combatants in the region.
中方不认同对海湾国家的攻击，谴责一切无差别袭击平民和非军事目标的行为。 当务之急是立即停止军事行动，防止战火进一步蔓延。
Beijing is urging the US and Israel to halt their military operations. Foreign Minister Wang Yi spoke with his Pakistani and Qatari counterparts, where he described the war as lacking legitimacy and legality. He also warned a prolonged war will only cause more senseless casualties. Qatar says it hopes Beijing will help broker a ceasefire. Meanwhile, the U.S. is under fire after Energy Secretary Chris Wright wrongly claimed that the Navy escorted a tanker through the Strait of Hormuz. The post was deleted, with officials saying it was incorrectly captioned. The White House and Pentagon clarified that no tanker or commercial ship was escorted. Now, Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi accused Washington of spreading misinformation to influence markets. The country's Revolutionary Guard said no U.S. vessel had dared to approach the strait. The Strait of Hormuz is a key energy route, particularly crucial for major Asian economies that depend on its oil and gas supplies. Now, Washington has hit 16 Iranian mine-laying vessels near the Strait of Hormuz. Well, since the war began, Iran says U.S.-Israeli forces have bombed nearly 10,000 civilian sites in the country, killing more than 1,300 civilians. Israeli striking Iran and Lebanon, the IDF saying it's hitting targets connected to the Iran-backed Hezbollah. Oli Barrett is watching developments for CNA, and he joins us live from Erbil in Iraq. Oli, first of all, is this a conflict that would continue to grow and rope in more than the dozen countries already involved, or are there indications that perhaps it can be de-escalated, and how?
There are absolutely calls here in this region for de-escalation, a flurry of diplomatic activity to try and achieve that. Whether that will be fruitful or not, very much remains to be seen. But for example, overnight, the Prime Minister of the Kurdistan region of Iraq, where I am, spoke with the President of the UAE. They both called for de-escalation and work to try and resolve and lower the conflict. That after a drone hit the UAE consulate here in Erbil. We've seen the Prime Minister of the Kurdistan region, but also the Prime Minister of federal Iraq, both congratulating Iran's new supreme leader on taking on that role. All sorts of other calls and conversations going on regionally to try and de-escalate, but as I say, remains to be seen how fruitful that will be. And one of the real fears in cities like Erbil, but other regional capitals, is the potential for the Americans at some point, as and when they stop their military operations against Iran, without leaving a significant plan, a strategic thought-through plan in place afterwards. And so one of the fears in places like Erbil and elsewhere in the region is that even when the Americans stop their military campaign, there could be a conflict in the region that continues beyond that point. And certainly for now, the real immediate fear is of even further, wider escalation into a bigger regional war.
Now, Karg Island, now that's a name that's been on the lips of many analysts, warning against any action on Iran's oil hub. Now, talk to us about Karg Island and why this stretch is so critical and what possibly a strike might mean for the conflict.
Analysts believe that would be a significant escalation in the conflict, but I think analysts also believe that even the fact that it is being speculated about illustrates some of the real fears that there are in Washington about the price of oil. We've seen evidence from President Trump's demeanor in recent days that he and his administration have been spooked by spiking oil prices at times since this conflict began, and they're looking at ways of trying to mitigate that. There's also the operations underway to take out, according to the Americans, mine-laying vessels in the Straits of Hormuz. That, again, an illustration of the Trump administration's desire to try and keep oil supplies flowing as much as possible, but all sorts of other solutions underway as well. Here in the Kurdistan region of northern Iraq, for example, there are discussions underway, it's reported, to significantly boost the flow of oil that goes from a pipeline in the north of Kurdistan to Ceyhan in Turkey. It has much more capacity than is currently used, but is often a source of tension between Erbil and Baghdad to the south. So it's that kind of thing that governments like Iraq are having to look at to try and make sure they can get their oil to market if this conflict continues and if disruption to oil supplies continues as well.
All right, we thank you so much, Ali Barrett, reporting for CNA from Erbil in Iraq. Now, all eyes still on that flow of oil through the Strait of Hormuz. Now, 3 vessels were struck in the Gulf on Wednesday, taking the total number of ships hit since the start of the war to more than a dozen now. Roland Lim is joining us to tell us how the markets are reacting.
Thanks, Jill. The crude market has been hit by wild volatility since the war in Iran began. Fears of prolonged supply disruptions sent benchmark crude surging at the start of the week to nearly $120 a barrel. That's the highest since 2022. Now, prices eased slightly on reports that the International Energy Agency, or IEA, may launch its largest ever release of oil reserves, but are inching up again on doubts whether the plan would materialize. Brent crude currently at this hour is up by 5.65%, $92.76 a barrel. West Texas Intermediate, the U.S. market, $88.13. Asia is reeling from the brunt of the volatility, its heavy dependence on imported energy from the Gulf, leaving it vulnerable to the escalating Iran conflict and oil supply risks. World Trade Organization data show that Japan and the Philippines source nearly 90% of their oil from the Persian Gulf. China and India get up to 45% of their energy there. Any disruption in the Strait of Hormuz would deal a severe blow to their economies. Morgan Stanley says Asia is the most exposed to rising oil prices, while Europe and the US face milder effects. A sustained $10 per barrel increase would shave 0.2 to 0.3 percentage points off regional GDP. Nomura says developed Asia holds larger oil reserves than emerging economies, meaning any prolonged disruption would hit unevenly. Japan and South Korea have the biggest buffers, while low stockpiles leave India and Indonesia especially exposed. A panic buying has already been reported in parts of the Philippines, Indonesia, Thailand, and Vietnam. Governments are rolling out contingency plans, working remotely, 4-day weeks, and higher energy subsidies. Now, Japan is implementing a phased release of its national reserves, South Korea has introduced a $68.3 billion stabilization fund to manage rising energy costs. The Philippines is limiting official travel. Now, Thailand and Vietnam have told staff to work from home, while Indonesia is boosting fuel subsidies. India is redirecting LPG away from industrial users to households. The supply concerns come as some of the region's biggest economies are already slowing. Now, prolonged high prices could widen budget deficits and add to inflationary pressures. Now, Lin Ye, who is the Vice President Commodity Markets Oil at Rystad Energy, explains why some Asian economies are hit harder by the oil supply disruptions than others.
So apparently China and Japan are in good positions as these two countries hold a lot of crude and product inventories, which could potentially cover 5 to 8 months of their import demand. And India could benefit from Russian crude in the short term. But countries like the Philippines, Vietnam, and Australia could really face not just crude shortages, but also fuel shortages very soon because they rely on higher level of fuel imports from other countries. And now countries like China and Japan, South Korea are exporting ban their oil products. So that means countries relying on their exports will suffer from the immediate fuel shortage. No doubt, all the countries in this region are trying to prioritizing their citizens over industries during the times of shortage, but industries are taking the hit right now, and that will ultimately affect economic growth. And in terms of the effectiveness, actually, it largely depends on how long the strait stays closed.
The group of 7 energy ministers say they stand ready to take all necessary measures in coordination with the International Energy Agency to address the surge in oil prices driven by the Middle East conflict. The Wall Street Journal has reported, citing officials familiar with the matter, that the IEA had proposed its largest ever release of oil reserves to counter soaring crude prices. The proposed release this time is said to exceed the 182 million barrels of oil that the IEA member countries put onto the market back in 2022 when Russia invaded Ukraine. William Denslow filed this report for CNA from Brussels.
European officials have been clear that the impact of elevated energy prices could have major consequences beyond just that tangible fact that prices at the petrol pump and other implications of those rising energy prices could have for consumers across Europe. There are fears over inflation, fears over supply chain disruptions, financing, other ramifications that could be felt. However, what we're hearing from a number of European leaders is that there could be a huge discrepancy based on how long this conflict lasts, whether it lasts just days or weeks or even months. That is why a number of European leaders are advocating for more of a wait-and-see response. We've heard from representatives from Ireland, including Simon Harris, who's been here in Belgium, the finance minister from Ireland. He says that the economic medicine must match the prescription.
As we've consistently said in Ireland, as we say in Europe as well, the length and the depth of this crisis will have a very material impact on the economic effect of the crisis as well. So we continue to monitor this very closely, very carefully, and the Irish government keeps everything under review.
There's been plenty of conversation about what can be done to mitigate the short-term impacts of these rising energy costs, but for European officials also an opportunity to look at the long-term picture as well. The message we're hearing from European officials is that the bloc is better placed from the last major energy crisis after Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine in the spring of 2022. But they warn far more needs to be done, and Europe still lacks self-sufficiency when it comes to its own energy needs. Now, according to officials, there is now more solar and wind power as part of the overall energy mix than from fossil fuels. But Ursula von der Leyen, the Commission President, says that the energy mix from nuclear power has dropped substantially since 1990. It used to stand at about a third of the energy mix, now closer to 15%. Ursula von der Leyen has described that as a strategic mistake.
After years of declining investment, we need more to turn the tide. And this is why today we are presenting a new European strategy for small modular reactors as a Commission. Our goal is very simple. We want this new technology to be operational in Europe by the early 2030.
And an overarching message from European officials is that they categorically reject any kind of assertions that perhaps any kind of sanctions could be eased from Russia to help alleviate the energy crisis. For many European capitals, in solidarity with Kyiv, that is straight and foremost a non-starter. But of course, these energy questions and the wider conversation about how to tackle the crisis in the Middle East will be central when European leaders gather here in Brussels for a high-stakes, high-level meeting late next week. For CNA, I'm William Denslow in Brussels.
And I'll be back with more business news in a bit.
All right, don't go too far. See you then. Now, the head of China's top political advisory body has called on its members to promote unity as the country embarks on the next phase of economic transformation, with a new 5-year plan beginning this year. The Chinese People's Political Consultative Conference wrapped up its week-long meetings with over 5,000 proposals from members. CNA's Deborah Wong reports.
From business leaders to athletes and movie stars, the trajectory of the world's second-largest economy has been in focus, as over 2,000 delegates of China's top political advisory body gathered in Beijing over the past week, many putting forward ideas linked to China's science and tech push.
我是搞核工业的，对核工业的发展，对核电的发展，希望我们对能源的安全能够更大的帮助。这个也是数字化转型嘛，大数据的应用、模型的应用、数据化转型，在我们工业当中的应用。
就是把我们这个基础研究，无论是育种，还有我们土壤这个保持，还有我们病虫害控制，应用基础的一个研究给它，做好。但我们国家，那个每5年的这个计划都是一个衔接的，不是割裂的。
对于我们陕西来讲，也是有非常好的科技实力，然后对于未来的新质生产力，我们也有很好的布局。
They're echoing China's call to build self-reliance, drive original innovation, and accelerate AI adoption across industries. They were all emphasized in a government work report and draft 5-year plan outline released last week. China wants to lead the world in AI and smart manufacturing by 2030, and some members called for better coordination between government, businesses, and research institutions to improve data, funding, and talent flows. At the closing of its annual gathering, China's number 4 ranking official Wang Huning urged members to rally support for the government's plans.
善于用“14五”重大成就和“15五”美好愿景，激励人、鼓舞人、感召人，协助党和政府做好宣传政策、解疑释惑、理顺情绪、化解矛盾的工作。
This comes as China set its GDP growth target for this year at 4.5 to 5%, its lowest in decades. Also, as it laid out plans to tackle social challenges relating to jobs and its aging population.
Though the CPPCC does not have any legislative power, delegates represent different sectors and provide recommendations on key documents, including China's new 5-year plan, the country's socio-economic blueprint starting this year. But ultimately, it is the National People's Congress, China's largely ceremonial parliament, that will decide.
The NPC will close its session on Thursday. It is also set to approve a draft environmental code and law on ethnic unity. Deborah Wong, CNA, Beijing.
Coming up on East Asia Tonight, Cathay Pacific targets 10% growth in passenger capacity this year, despite a turbulent global backdrop. Plus, China warns state-owned firms and government agencies against AI OpenClaw as security risks mount. Welcome back, everyone. It's business news again, and Roland joins me with more on that. And Roland, a deeper dive into those oil prices. They've fallen to about $90 a barrel, and that must surely be good news for the market.
Yes, it does. East Asian markets are calmer after a volatile start to the week. Traders still trying to assess tanker traffic via the Strait of Hormuz and its knock-on effects on oil-dependent economies. A choppy relief rally for the region as oil prices eased earlier following the IEA's oil reserve release plan. Still, the sentiment remains cautious as contradictory signals from the Middle East leaves investors struggling to gauge its impact on global inflation and growth. Taiwan's benchmark led the region higher 4.1% up to a near one-week high. The Nikkei and the Kospi also jumping 1.4%, extending their rally for a second session. Both the mainland indices also closing higher, with defense and new energy sectors leading the gains. Shanghai Composite ending the day 0.25% up. Second bourse, the Shenzhen component did better. It's up 0.8%. And Hang Seng Index in Hong Kong gave up earlier gains to close down 0.24. South Korea says it's mulling a raft of measures in a bid to cushion the economic fallout from disruptions caused by the war in Iran. During an emergency meeting today, Finance Minister Koo Yoon-chai says that the measures could include an extra budget to support businesses, echoing a call made by President Lee Jae-myung yesterday. The government also says it is prepared to expand a market stabilization program worth around $70 billion. South Korea has taken a tough stance against fuel price gouging, with Mr. Lee last week warning of heavy consequences and the antitrust regulator launching probes against petrol stations. Other measures Seoul plans to take include a temporary cap on fuel prices as well as a ban on hoarding by oil refiners. Now, South Korea is particularly vulnerable to disruptions in the Middle East, with around 70% of its crude oil imports passing through the Strait of Hormuz. Flag carrier Cathay Pacific bullish on the current year's earnings after delivering solid profit for last financial year. It's planning to hike fuel surcharges for both consumers and cargo, as jet fuel prices have doubled as part of how the carrier copes with the volatility. The airline's half-yearly report card showed net profit rising 14%, off a similar increase in its revenue as well, with higher passenger numbers as well as robust cargo demand. That pushed full-year profit up almost 10% to $1.4 billion, beating analysts' estimates. Now, Cathay Pacific maintains it is well-positioned to deal with the volatility in jet fuel prices and shifts in passenger flows. The airline hedges about 30% of its near-term jet fuel needs and imposes surcharges on passenger tickets. Now, the airline has cancelled flights to Dubai and Riyadh till the end of March and is adding more services to London and Zurich, given the spike in demand for Asia-Europe flights to avoid the Middle East. Shares closing more than 4% higher after the release of the results. China's COSCO Shipping has suspended operations at Balboa Port near the Panama Canal amid a growing U.S.-China dispute over control of the waterway. The move follows a January Panama Supreme Court ruling voiding the contract held by a unit of Hong Kong's CK Hutchison. Beijing has reportedly urged Chinese shippers to reroute cargo away from Panama and told state firms to pause new projects there. CK Hutchison agreed last March to sell 43 ports globally in a $23 billion deal to a consortium led by BlackRock and MSC. The Chinese authorities growing wary of potential security risks linked to AI agent OpenClaw. Government agencies and state-owned enterprises have reportedly warned staff against installing the software. The caution comes even as companies roll out OpenClaw apps and local governments push to build an industry around it. While the tool is gaining popularity for boosting workplace efficiency, concerns are mounting over possible data leaks, deletion, or misuse. Australian miner Lynas Rare Earths surging more than 16% after sealing a major supply deal with Japanese customers. The agreement underscores efforts to secure critical minerals after Beijing imposed export curbs last year amid a diplomatic spat. Now, Lynas, the largest rare earth producer outside China, will allocate 75% of its heavy rare earth oxide output to Japan. The Japanese firms have also extended a supply pact, committing to buy 5,000 tons, or about half of Lynas's output, of a key magnet material through to 2038. Now, Tokyo says the deal secures reliable access to strategically vital minerals. And that'll do it for business. Joe.
Thanks so much, Roland. Coming up on East Asia tonight, 15 years after the Fukushima nuclear disaster, Japan pauses to remember, the Prime Minister pledging a new disaster management agency. South Korea's transport ministry accused of putting cost savings over safety in the latest report on the Jeju air crash that killed 179 people. This is East Asia Tonight, and here are the headlines we're following. China says it does not agree with the attacks on Gulf states as Tehran ramps up strikes on targets across the region, including oil infrastructure. Crude climbs again after a brief dip, with markets unconvinced that a proposed stockpile released by the International Energy Agency will tame prices. And China's top political advisory body concludes its fourth session, calling for unity and progress as the country prepares to roll out a new 5-year plan for the next phase of economic transformation. A moment of silence was held across Japan today, marking 15 years since the earthquake and tsunami that killed more than 22,000 people and triggered the Fukushima nuclear disaster. Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi attended a memorial in Fukushima, paying tribute to the victims. She pledged to strengthen Japan's disaster response system.
東日本大震災における経験を生かし、今後切迫する大規模資源災害に対し、徹底した事前防災の推進や、発災時から復旧復興までの一貫した災害対応の司令塔となる防災庁を今年中に設置すべく準備を加速し、災害に強い国づくりを進めてまいります。
The magnitude 9.0 quake and tsunami devastated northeast Japan and caused triple meltdowns at the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear plant. Decommissioning remains slow. About 880 tons of melted fuel debris still inside 3 reactors. Our test removals have retrieved less than 1 gram in total. Full-scale extraction has been delayed to around 2037, and it's not clear if the 2051 decommissioning target can be met. CNA senior correspondent Michiyo Ishida has the latest on Fukushima's recovery.
On the 11th of March 2011, a magnitude 9 earthquake rattled northeastern Japan, triggering powerful tremors in 8 Japanese prefectures. Tsunamis of up to 9 meters were reported, smashing huge parts of the coastline and causing the meltdown of the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear plant. 19,782 people were killed in the triple disaster, and more than 2,000 are still unaccounted for. Some 470,000 residents were forced to evacuate. And in Fukushima today, about 23,700 have still not returned.
お戻りになりたい方は、ほぼ 100% 帰還されていると思いますし、住宅、等についても、そういう整備も、ほぼ終わっていると思います。福島県の、 原子力事故の被災地域については帰還されたパーセンテージは、それぞれの町によって、数パーセントのところから 60% とか 70% までの、違いがあります。
Minister Makino said 2.2% of Fukushima is still a designated evacuation zone. This includes the site of the crippled power plant and the interim storage area for contaminated soil. The biggest challenge for the nation is the decommissioning of the plant. After the earthquake and tsunami, 3 of the plant's 6 reactors melted down. Spent fuel has been removed from 2 of them so far, and the Tokyo Electric Power Company, or TEPCO, aims to do so for all 6 reactors by 2031. As for the melted debris, less than 1 gram has been removed out of an estimated 880 tons. In February, TEPCO unveiled a 22-meter-long robotic arm designed to remove debris from reactor number 2. The snake-like arm can move through confined spaces and has a camera to better inspect complex structures. Meanwhile, contaminated water used to cool the fuel rods continues to accumulate on site, stored in massive tanks. Since August 2023, TEPCO has been treating and discharging the wastewater into the sea, a process reviewed by the International Atomic Energy Agency to be in line with international safety standards. In all, 133,000 tons of water has been discharged so far, with the latest release taking place this month. Tourist arrivals in Japan have hit a record high in recent years, with numbers topping pre-COVID levels. But that's not the case in Fukushima.
福島県においては、震災前と比べた外国人の延べの宿泊者数の伸び率が原子力災害による風評の影響などによって東北全体の水準にはまだ達していない状況です。政府としては引き続き福島をはじめとする被災地の観光資源を後押しをしてまいります。
The government is hoping to attract more visitors to the region's scenic areas and says its produce and fishery products are tested and safe for the market. Michio Ishida, CNA, Tokyo.
North Korean leader Kim Jong-un has overseen the test launch of strategic cruise missiles from its biggest Navy ship. This is Pyongyang's second test in 7 days. A state media, KCNA, showed Mr. Kim and his daughter watching the test from a conference room. The missiles flew for nearly 3 hours over the sea before hitting island targets off North Korea's west coast. According to KCNA, Mr. Kim underscored the need to maintain a powerful and reliable nuclear war deterrent. Now, Tuesday's missile tests coincided with the start of U.S.-South Korean military drills that Pyongyang views as a rehearsal for an invasion. The springtime exercise, known as Freedom Shield, will take place until next Thursday. Around 18,000 troops are expected to take part to test joint operational capabilities and incorporate war scenarios. Both countries have said the drills are defensive in nature. Now, the latest report on the Jeju air crash in South Korea says the Transport Ministry put cost savings above safety concerns. Auditors say officials cut construction costs and approved unsafe airport structures for more than 2 decades. The 2024 crash killed about 180 people. The Boeing 737-800 plane struck birds on approach and overran the runway, slamming into a concrete embankment supporting a localizer antenna. Now, the report says the Transport Ministry built the 2.4-meter embankment to reduce costs without properly reviewing safety standards. Under international rules, these structures must be designed to break apart on impact. The ministry also wrongly approved 14 non-compliant installations at 8 airports, including Muan, Gimhae, and Jeju. Additionally, for up to 22 years, the ministry certified operating permits and approved inspections that falsely concluded that safety standards were met. The ministry says it accepts the findings and will tighten safety measures. A full investigation report is still pending. Muan Airport remains closed. The Hong Kong Red Cross has raised $67.8 million in support of the people affected by last year's Wang Fuk Court fire, which killed 168 people and displaced almost 5,000 residents. It's been 3 months since the massive fire shocked Hong Kong. The Red Cross expects to complete all relief and recovery efforts over the next 5 years. 55% of donations will go towards emergency response measures. Now, out of the total funds raised, around $12.8 million will provide affected families with 6 months of financial assistance. Another $15 million will go towards long-term support for vulnerable families, including those with children and the elderly. 40% of donations will fund a 5-year community recovery program addressing various physical, mental and social needs. It will also help strengthen public disaster preparedness. Just 5% of the funds will be used for the charity's administrative costs, in line with government guidelines. Now, Hong Kong and the government had also raised $600 million late last month, providing affected residents with financial assistance. It recently announced plans to use part of the money to purchase Wang Fuk Court flats for owners who are looking to sell them. Coming up on East Asia Tonight, how stricter immigration rules are weighing on the UK's healthcare system, strained further by an ageing population. Australia has granted asylum to 2 more members of the Iranian women's football team who decided to stay in the country due to their fears for their safety if they returned home. A player and a support staff member accepted the government's offer of asylum after 5 players were granted protection a day earlier. Australian Home Affairs Minister Tony Burke says the 2 members of the football team separated from their minders to meet with the federal police at Brisbane Airport before he joined them.
I made them the same offer that I had made the 5 players the night before, and that was that if they wanted to receive a humanitarian visa for Australia, which would have a pathway to a permanent visa, I had the paperwork ready to execute that immediately. They both said that they did. I signed off on that.
Well, those visas are valid for 12 months and have previously been given to other nationals from regions experiencing conflict, like those from Afghanistan and Ukraine. The rest of the travelling team, well, they arrived in Kuala Lumpur on a flight from Sydney earlier today. They are expected to return to Iran, subject to flight availability and the reopening of Iran's airspace. Now, Mr. Burke says Border Force officials made similar offers to the team before they departed. The athletes were criticised in Iran for not singing the country's national anthem before a match last week, and that was interpreted by some hardliners inside Tehran as, quote, wartime betrayal. Human rights activists and politicians, including US President Donald Trump, then appealed for the team to be offered official protection. Iran has reportedly invited the remaining members back with, quote, peace and confidence. The Philippine President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. has made a pitch before the United Nations General Assembly as the country seeks a non-permanent seat on the Security Council. Mr. Marcos sought to represent developing countries amid several crises across the globe, especially as the Philippines serves as ASEAN chair this year. Mitch McCann filed this report for CNA from the United Nations in New York.
President Marcos used his address, which lasted more than 20 minutes, to petition for a seat on the Security Council, saying the Philippines would use it to give a voice to developing countries and to address the many crises the world faces.
We stand ready to do our part to stay the forces of war, to end conflict, to ease suffering. We call for urgent and much-needed action for peace in the Middle East, in the Ukraine, in Sudan, the DRC, the Sahel, Yemen, and Myanmar. Their people continue to live in fear and in despair. These tragedies need to stop. Innocents must be protected, and their basic needs immediately provided.
5 countries are permanent members of the UN Security Council, while 10 others serve 2-year terms before being rotated out, and those nations don't have veto powers. Each member holds the presidency of the Security Council for 1 month on a rotating basis and can organise meetings and set the agenda, providing a chance to elevate issues important to their own region, in the Philippines' case, Southeast Asia. President Marcos made clear the Philippines places a heavy importance on combating climate change, touting the country's National Climate Change Action Plan. He said the government has committed a significant amount of its annual budget to the cause.
The climate crisis is not a future risk. It is for us a present reality. It reshapes our coastlines, our communities, and even the Filipino psyche. Each typhoon, flood, and period of extreme drought leaves its mark, not only in physical damage, but trauma in the minds of our children. A 2022 survey showed that young people from the Philippines reported the highest vulnerability to climate anxiety.
The UN is at times criticised for being too bureaucratic and failing to reflect the world today, particularly at the Security Council. President Marcos called for reform and for Africa to have a permanent seat at the table.
The Philippines strongly believes that the UN development system must better cater to the specific needs of middle-income countries. For we are home to 75% of the world's population, 60% of its poor, and a third of global production. The Philippines supports Africa's call for fundamental reform of global governance structures, including permanent African representation in the UN Security Council.
President Marcos avoided controversial issues during his address, making no mention of the South China Sea and choosing not to speak at length about specific crises, such as the current conflict in Iran. The Philippines has served on the UN Security Council 4 times previously, the last being 2004-2005. And for it to happen again, it will need a 2/3 majority vote from the General Assembly in June. For CNA, I'm Mitch McCann at the UN in New York.
For decades, the UK has been an attractive job destination for foreign nurses from countries such as India and the Philippines. But recent changes to UK immigration law have made it tougher for them to attain permanent residence or permission to remain. There are concerns that these changes could impact staffing for a healthcare system already under strain. Here's Stuart Smith for CNA from London in the third part of our series on the global migration of nurses.
25 years ago, Louis Horn left the Philippines to become a nurse in the UK. Back then, she found she was just one of 5 foreign nurses at her hospital in East England. Fast forward to the 2020s, and for every UK-trained nurse joining the National Register, an internationally trained nurse joined too. But last year, that changed. The government tightened entry for overseas nurses to try to lower record-high net migration numbers. Visas became 7% more expensive, and foreign nurses in the private sector may now have to wait 10 years for settled status, rather than 5, to live in the UK indefinitely.
It's very important as a trade union for us to protect these workers, to make sure that they are safe where they're working, they're not treated unfairly, and that we don't increase the vulnerability they're feeling by giving them these new visa rules that restricts them from staying here.
Around a fifth of the National Health Service workforce was born overseas. Half of those are Asian, mostly Indian and Filipino. It underscores that international perceptions of life here are vital to recruiting the healthcare workers required to sustain the system. As London attempts to reduce reliance on international workers and the number eligible for permanent residency, the UK's care sector for elderly people has seen an even greater shake-up. Care homes are effectively banned from hiring abroad. They can no longer sponsor the visas of any applicant who is not already living here legally in the UK. The government told CNA that's also because there were unacceptable levels of abuse and exploitation of arrivals, in some cases leading to debt and mistreatment. With salaries limited, international recruitment essentially forbidden, and a growing elderly population, the care sector is worried for what's to come.
We cannot accept applications from overseas, which is devastating. And what they've said is that we can only recruit migrant workers that are already in the United Kingdom.
That's particularly frustrating, as Mr. Segal found success recruiting from southern India, and the government may still change the rules for those already here. That's left some of his staff feeling uncertain about their future. Alamin Mia came to England in 2021 to study business administration. He graduated from university in Bangladesh, but struggled to find fulfilling work there. He's now a carer in rural East England.
It's very difficult to survive here when you are working in care sector, but if you see what we are doing, we are giving our best. We are working very hard to support people.
The government is creating a new body that will negotiate pay between trade unions and employers, which it claims will be raising care workers' salaries by 2028. Too little, too late, says the care sector, which believes that won't be enough to encourage enough domestic workers to fill the gap created by the sharp fall in overseas recruits. For CNA, I'm Stuart Smith in London.
I'm Ang Hui Min in Singapore. The nation has long attracted foreign nurses who form a crucial part of its healthcare workforce.
There are wider opportunities for me. I felt like we are treated fairer.
But as global demand for nurses increases, the competition for talent is heating up.
I understand why we want to go and take a look, because we always thought the grass is greener on the other side.
Singapore is stepping up retention efforts, but is it enough to keep its nurses? Don't miss that story. Thursday on CNA, in the final part of our Nurses Beyond Borders series.
There's so many facets to this story, and all of them are part of CNA Correspondent Show, which examines the outward migration of nursing professionals and the consequences for home and host country. You can watch it all tonight at 9:30 p.m. Singapore, Hong Kong time on CNA. Our Nurses Beyond Borders series also on our digital platforms, and for that you can head to cna.asia or download the CNA mobile app. Well, here's where we leave it for East Asia tonight, but don't forget again your headlines anytime at cna.asia, or you can check us out at Facebook and YouTube. Bye-bye.